There's been new developments in a case that is extremely tragic. On Christmas Eve 1984 in New Jersey, two boys were in the local woods. They discovered something that would no doubt haunt them for the rest of their lives. Wrapped up in a plastic bag was a newborn baby deceased. The bag was wrapped in a towel and the baby still had its umbilical cord attached. Police named the little girl Baby Mary. Now, it's long remained a mystery what actually happened leading up to this. Now, a woman from South Carolina is facing manslaughter charges for the crime that happened nearly 40 years ago. The woman's actually not been named due to being 17 at the time of the baby's death. Thanks to DNA technology, the woman was identified as the mother of the child this year. She's now been formally charged. It's also been discovered that the father of the baby was 19 years old at the time of the child's death. He actually passed away in 2009. Both the mother and father were in school at the time of the baby's death.
I'm not kidding when I say one of the weirdest mysteries I've ever heard about just got solved. So for 4 years in Brooklyn, this one community was tormented by a serial litterer. And I'm not talking about like throwing napkins on the ground. No, every Sunday for the last 4 years, someone was ripping thousands of pages out of books and just littering them everywhere. And they were like weird, like it'd be entire sections of the Bible spread out throughout the streets. People said they found X-rated images from magazines in the 70s. And sometimes there were like passages highlighted, so people thought it was maybe some sort of code. And no one knew who it was or if it was even intentional until this video, where you can see someone deliberately throwing the pages outside of their car. And then once people realize it's intentional, it's like, okay, is this some sort of like fetish? And finally, one neighbor's like, I have to figure out who this is. So they do multiple overnight stakeouts just sitting in the street. And they figure out who it was.
It was a cop.
It was this cop, John Trasinski. He had apparently gotten in trouble for littering before and lost one vacation day over it, which kinda actually makes me think that it was a fetish thing. Anyways, if you like weird dark stuff, you'll probably like my podcast.
They cut off my head to play soccer with it. My name is Michael Moss. At the age of 15, I went through a terrifying ordeal. In 1999, a dark event turned my life upside down. I began dating Alan Bentley's former boyfriend. This news was unbearable for him, and he issued a deadly threat. Tell Moss I'm going to kill him, I'll smash his skull. One night, being an avid motocross enthusiast, my buddy Graham Neri reached out. He wanted to introduce me to a new track. Eagerly, I headed there, oblivious to the fact it was an ambush. Bentley and Mark McAfee were waiting for me. They brutally assaulted me, landing multiple blows to my head. They shattered a vodka bottle over me, and in an act of sheer savagery, drew a tic-tac-toe on my bloodied back. After a devastating kick that nearly decapitated me, they turned this atrocity into a morbid game, using my head as a ball for penalty shots. Carried away by a rage reminiscent of a Tarantino scene, Bentley sliced off my 2 ears and whispered a grim tune into one of them, before leaving my disfigured body in the park. During the investigations, consumed by guilt, Graham confessed and exposed Bentley.
Blood-curdling facts that you wish you never knew. The chemical weapon sarin gas works by not allowing your body's muscles to relax, so they can constrict but are unable to release, causing every single part of your body to cramp until you suffocate to death. Up until the 1800s, dentures were primarily made by the teeth of dead soldiers. Speaking of teeth, babies' adult teeth are located right below their eyeballs. There was a Roman form of torture known as goat's lick, where a person's feet were soaked in salt water and the goat would lick their feet until their flesh was gone. Most serial killers are born in November. When a woman with breast implants is cremated, her implants will melt and drip to the bottom of the furnace. A man was once discovered to have a fir tree growing inside of his body. The doctors thought it was a tumor, but they soon discovered he had inhaled a fir tree seed and it had sprouted and grown inside of his lungs. Right now, in your bed are between 100,000 to 10 million dust mites. And if this isn't bad enough, they feast on skin flakes. An octopus is so flexible that it's capable of entering through your mouth, traveling through your digestive tract, and coming out through your asshole. Curdling facts that you wish you never knew. When a person is electrocuted via electric chair, they feel absolutely everything. They're completely aware of their body being deep fried in real time. And one person who survived the first round of electrocution said it tasted like cold peanut butter. As you're watching this video, your internal organs are constantly moving around inside you. Your armpit is where most of your important nerves in your arms are, so if you stab it, it will leave your arm completely useless. Ted Bundy, the serial killer, used to work at a suicide hotline. Scaphism was a form of ancient torture where someone's body was tied between two boats and they were covered in milk and honey, and bugs and other animals would feast on their body for days. Cotard's delusion is a rare condition where people literally think they're dead, and many of them ask to be taken to a cemetery to be with other dead people. There are over 200 dead bodies on Mount Everest, and they're used as checkpoints by climbers. If you die inside of your house, it's very common that your pet is going to want to eat you. You wouldn't do that, would you? Neil Armstrong's footprints on the moon don't match up with the ones on his astronaut suit.
One attorney said that this man is one of the most dangerous criminals ever. This case is absolutely horrendous. Mary Sisk was about to start a PhD. She had 4 young children with her husband John, and their family was excited to meet 6-month-old baby Colson. However, tragically, the first time their family would meet the little baby was when he was in a casket. 14-year-old Mason Sisk lived in the family home along with the siblings aged 6, 4 and 6 months. John was Mason's dad and Mary was his stepmom. Mason took a dislike to Mary, however, and once even attempted to poison her. He knew she had a severe peanut allergy and he attempted to lace her drink with peanut. That having failed, on September the 2nd, 2019, the unthinkable happened. A hideous massacre would take the lives of all but one family member. Gunshots could be heard as Mason callously shot all of the family members as they slept in their beds. When asked what the motive for the killing was, he stated, "They argue a lot and I got fed up with it." The judge wrote that the crime was ghastly, disturbing and draped in unmitigated evil. Now 18 years old, Mason has been sentenced to life in prison.
This town in Florida is home to around 150 sex offenders, and this includes rapists and pedophiles. So this is Miracle Village, Florida. It's out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by fields of sugarcane, and it was founded in 2009 by a local evangelical pastor. He wanted to provide a community where people who have been charged and convicted with these crimes can exist. So every single person that lives in this community has a disturbing story. Now, I think the kind of idea behind the community is a great idea and it can help foster some rehabilitation for these people, but when you look into these people's histories, it's just shocking. Now, the faces that I'm showing here aren't the people that these stories are about, but these are just some of the residents of the village, and I'm going to read to you a few of these quotes. When talking to Time magazine, one person said, "I had sex with my younger brother." Another person wrote that she got married to a man who abused her, which led her to molest her own children. And another member of this village said that they got in trouble for having a relationship with a 16-year-old when they were 18 years old. The girl's parents got involved, and that's what led to him going to prison. There are some really compelling documentaries about this place that you can find online if you want to. But why don't you let me know in the comments below, what do you think of this idea? Is it a good idea?
A woman melted into a couch when her parents neglected her for 12 years. This case literally gave me the chills. So what happened? On the 3rd of January 2022, Lacey Fletcher was found naked and deceased on her parents' couch in Louisiana. She was left there by her parents, who claimed all she wanted to do was sit there. You see, Lacey had been sick. She had a whole host of medical issues which immobilized her, and her parents were meant to be taking care of her. Police found her, she had been sitting on that couch for over 12 years. Her skin had melted into the fabric, and it created a sort of hole, which you can see here. She was also covered in urine, feces, and maggots. She had severe ulcers all over her body. Her parents basically let her sit in a pile of human filth. Even more disturbing was the fact that Lacey was extremely skinny when they found her. It was almost like she had been starved. And in the autopsy, they discovered foam from the couch in her stomach, which means she had been so hungry she had tried to eat that couch. There's no doubt that Lacey died from severe neglect. Interestingly enough, her parents, Sheila and Clay Fletcher, they were considered pillars in their community, and they were described by their neighbors as nice, church-going people. They had no idea what they were hiding in their house. Both Lacey's parents were arrested and charged. To hear more sinful deeds from real-life people, hit the plus button.
Did you know that the Scream movies were inspired by a real serial killer? Well, you will now. Hello, true crimers. This is the case of Danny Rolling, also known as the Gainesville Ripper. Viewer discretion is advised. Daniel Rolling here was born in 1954 in Shreveport, Louisiana. As per the usual with most serial killers, he grew up in a troubled home. His father was actually a cop who said that Danny You weren't loved, and we didn't want you. That's always good parenting. And by 1990, he actually tried to kill his dad. Family of the Year. By 1990, he had moved to, you guessed it, Florida. Gainesville, to be specific, hence the Gainesville Ripper name. On the morning of August 24th, 1990, he would break into the home of two college students, Sonia Larson and Christina Powell. He stood over Christina's sleeping body and just watched her for a while before heading upstairs. Now, the intent was to burglarize the home, because this was during a spree of burglaries that he was committing. He found Sonia Larson upstairs, and he stabbed her to death. No real reason, just did it. He then went back downstairs, woke up Christina, tied her up, sexually assaulted her, forced her to lay face down, and then stabbed her multiple times in the back, killing her as well. The next day, August 25th, he then breaks into the apartment of Christina Hoyt. Now, she wasn't home, so he hid in the apartment and waited for her to come home. That's not remotely terrifying. She walked in sometime after 11 o'clock that morning. He then snuck up behind her, tied her up, taped her mouth shut, sexually assaulted her, forced her to lay on her stomach while he stabbed her in the back repeatedly. He managed to actually puncture her heart. Now, Danny had left the apartment. He then thought, oh, did I leave my wallet there? So he went back. He then decided to decapitate Krista Hoyt. And then he posed her severed head to look at her dead body. Jesus. August 27th, he's not done. He breaks into the apartment of Tracy Paulus and Manuel Taboada. And Danny struggled with Manuel, but he managed to kill Manuel anyway. He then did the same thing to Tracy that he did to the other girls. This became national news. Louisiana detectives, they contacted Gainesville detectives and said, your cases sound a lot like our unsolved triple homicide. That happened on November 4th, 1989. The murders of William, Julie, and Sean Grissom. Shreveport had vaguely considered Danny Rolling a suspect, and they found out he was in Gainesville. In November 91, he was charged with 8 murders. In 94, he was convicted and sentenced to death. He was executed in 2006. Womp womp.
This is the real-life story of the possession and exorcism of Annalise Michel. This is one of the few cases of demonic possession that has ever reached a legal court. Annalise Michel was a well-behaved girl who grew up in a strict Catholic family in Bavaria, Germany. In 1968, at the age of 16, she suffered a severe epileptic seizure. Over the next few years, she'd be diagnosed with temporal lobe epilepsy and depression, and she was prescribed medication for this. By 1973, she had also started hallucinating, particularly while praying, and these voices would tell her that she was damned to hell. Annalise became increasingly aggressive. She would growl, speak in languages her parents said that she didn't know, and on one occasion she even threw her sister across the room. According to her mom, she walked into a room to find Annalise staring at a cross with black eyes. Annalise was also seen eating bugs, and on one occasion she peed on the floor and then tried to lick it up. Her mother decided that this wasn't a mental health issue and that her daughter was possessed. Her neurologist also suggested that she needed to be taken to a priest, but then later denied saying this. Her mother took her to several priests who all said that Annalise needed a medical doctor until she finally found one that gave her permission to do an exorcism. 3 days after her 22nd birthday, Annalise would receive the first of what would come to be 67 exorcisms. These exorcisms were recorded, and here is a clip of one.
Sie müssen wieder auf der Kanzel predigen, dass mich gibt. Und das Volk nicht entführen. Oh. Ja! Das muss im Volk bewusst gemacht werden.
Annalise had also stopped eating during this time because she felt that starving herself would weaken the demons. She died in her sleep on July 1st, 1976 at the weight of just 66 pounds. After examining her body, doctors determined that she had passed away due to malnutrition and dehydration. She'd also been suffering from pneumonia, and her kneecaps were broken because she had been kneeling and praying so much. Her death had been investigated as a criminal matter, and they found that as soon as a week before her death, if she had been taken to a hospital, she could have survived. Her parents, along with the two priests who performed these exorcisms, were charged with negligent homicide, but they argued that Annalise had consented to these. They said that she could have said no at any time, but honestly, could she? Also, she was clearly mentally compromised, and they should have made the right decision for her. They also argued that the day before Annalise passed, the demon was exorcised, and that's why her autopsy came back normal. For what they did to Annalise, all 4 defendants were found guilty and sentenced to 3 years probation. The details of this case are so scary that it inspired the popular movie The Exorcism of Emily Rose. But who's the real monster here, the devil or an abusive and delusional parent?
People are being poisoned in ways you would never guess. In August of this year, Erin Mims was celebrating her birthday with her husband at a Houston restaurant, and after returning to her car, she noticed a napkin on the door handle. When Erin saw the napkin, she thought that her husband was playing a prank on her. She didn't really think much of it, so she grabbed the napkin and threw it out and asked her husband if he had put the napkin on the door handle, and he said no. That's when Erin went back into the restaurant to wash her hands. Shortly after returning to the car, Erin began to feel a tingling sensation on her fingers, and after 5 minutes, her whole arm began to feel numb. Erin says she was having trouble breathing, she got hot flashes, and her heart began to beat really fast. Erin was quickly taken to the hospital, and after doing some tests, they told her that her vitals were all over the place. The doctor told her that it was an acute poisoning from an unknown substance, and the napkin situation may have been an attempted kidnapping.
Are you home? Police department, if anyone's inside, make yourself known.
Chris is seen backing his truck up into the family's driveway, and there he is seen loading something into the back seat of the truck.
I have no idea where they went, and it's just earth-shattering. I don't feel like this is even real right now. It's like a nightmare that I just can't wake up from. I want her back so bad.
I promise you, when you start talking to us, you will feel better. You gotta help me. I know.
We're giving you a lifeline right now. You need to take it. You need to reach out and take it.
What? Look in there, mate. Look in there. What? Look in there. This is Jared Fogle, one of the worst pedophiles in American history. So if you don't know who Jared Fogle was, he was the spokesperson for Subway for a number of years. Jared initially became famous and then eventually became the spokesman of Subway because he dropped so much weight while eating a Subway diet. According to Jared, he lost almost 245 pounds while eating almost exclusively from Subway. Obviously, this was a huge story, and when Subway heard about this, they contacted Jared and eventually made him the spokesman for their entire company. I swear to God, I remember this. For years, you couldn't turn on the TV without seeing this guy's face. So in 2004, when Jared was at the height of his popularity, he launched the Jared Foundation, a foundation determined to fight childhood obesity. This foundation saw Jared touring schools across the nation, talking to kids about losing weight, and yeah, just being heavily involved with children, which people at the time thought was a great thing. But it was when he was away from the cameras, behind the scenes, when Jared was engaging in some of the most deplorable behavior I've ever read about. So in 2007, a radio host and journalist from Florida came forward to the FBI and reported that Jared was saying and doing some concerning things. Apparently, while at a middle school event, Jared had been talking to her about performing lewd acts on a minor. He had texted her about all of these things, and she even recorded him saying all of this stuff. At one point, apparently, Jared even asked this journalist if she could install webcams in her children's bedrooms so he could watch them. Obviously, this was concerning. This journalist recorded all of this, turned it into the FBI, but they told her that they couldn't do anything because they didn't have enough evidence. And now we got to talk about Russell Taylor, a guy who was heavily involved in Jared's foundation. So when he wasn't working on the Children's Foundation, this guy, Russell Taylor, was producing CP in his home. Apparently, between the years 2011 and 2015, Russell Taylor had videotaped minors in his own home and traded photographs of them with none other than, you guessed it, Jared Fogle, king of the footlong. According to court documents, Jared actually asked Russell if he could move some of the nanny cams in his home so he could watch children in varying states of undress or while they were naked taking a bath. Russell also claimed that Jared made him set up accounts on porn sites in his name, and he wanted to basically run his whole CP operation for him. Well, shortly after Russell Taylor was arrested, Jared Fogle's home was raided, and guess what they found? A ton of CP. On the same day that his home was raided, Subway severed all ties with Jared, and some new disturbing facts came to light during the trial. Apparently, years prior, Jared had been texting a Subway franchisee named Cindy, and over these texts, he talked about wanting to abuse kids aged 9 to 16. He told Cindy she should sell herself for sex on Craigslist, and even asked her to arrange a sexual meetup between him and her 16-year-old cousin. Eventually, Jared pled guilty to possession of CP and traveling to conduct an illicit sexual behavior with a minor. Apparently, while in New York City, he paid to have sex with a 17-year-old girl. But this story isn't over yet. I'm going to post part 2, and it definitely gets more interesting from here on out.
This is a case of 19-year-old Alexi Treviso and how she went to the hospital complaining of back pain, but ended up getting charged with murder. Alexi Treviso was a 19-year-old senior in high school living in Artesia, New Mexico. She was on the varsity cheerleading team, and she was dating her boyfriend Devin for about 2 years. Honestly, Alexi just seemed like a typical teenage girl. Her prom was coming up soon, her graduation was around the corner, and she was already thinking about what university she was going to go to in the fall. January 26, 2023, that day was pretty much just like any other day for 19-year-old Alexi. She went to cheerleading practice that day and got home in the afternoon. She spent some time with her family and then she went to bed. However, she was woken up in the middle of the night with severe back pain. This was like not normal back pain. Like Alexi was in so much pain that her mother decided to take her to the hospital. Alexi and her mother Rosa arrived at the Artesia General Hospital in the early morning hours of January 27. Alexi checked in and told the doctors that she had really bad pain in her back, so they wanted to do a test to see if maybe she had a UTI or a kidney infection, since back pain can be a symptom of both of those things. So they're getting ready to do those tests, and then they asked Alexi, "Are you pregnant?" Which is a very common thing to ask. I mean, if you're a girl and you've gone to the doctor before, I feel like they always ask you if you're pregnant. On top of that, experiencing back pain can be a symptom of pregnancy. So the doctor asked Alexi, "Are you pregnant?" And she says no, that she's still a virgin and that she hasn't engaged in any sexual activity. So the doctor's like, okay, perfect. And they send Alexi over to go get a CAT scan done so that they can check for kidney stones. And while she's getting that test done, the doctors decide to still do a pregnancy test just in case, because you never know. So they did a urine test, and when the results came back, they were positive. Alexi was pregnant. Now, of course, pregnancy tests can sometimes be inaccurate, so the doctors wanted to check her blood just to make sure that she was actually pregnant. While all of this is going on, Alexi tells the doctors that she needs to go to the bathroom. Like, she has to go number 2, and it's coming out like right now. So she gets up from the hospital bed and she literally runs to the bathroom holding her butt because she feels like it's going to come out. She locks herself inside the bathroom and she's in there for quite some time. Doctors and the staff at the hospital are getting kind of worried because she's been in there for a while and they know that she's pregnant. So they're thinking maybe she's having some type of miscarriage or something else is happening. They knock on the door, but Alexi refuses to come out. At one point, her mother Rosa also goes over to knock on the door, but Alexi says that she's just having trouble going number 2 and that she'll be out shortly. At this point, Alexi has been in the bathroom for more than like 20 minutes, so the doctors tell her, if you don't open the door right now, we're going to unlock it. Before the doctor can unlock the door, Alexi just opens up and starts walking back to her room. One of the doctors looks inside the bathroom just to see, what happened, and they do see that there was all over the floor. They asked Alexi, what's going on, and she said that she simply got her period. Call over the cleaning lady to come clean up the bathroom, and when she starts to take out the trash, notices that the trash bag feels heavier than usual. So Leela, the housekeeper, goes to look inside the garbage bin, and when she pulls out a bag, she finds a baby. The baby was inside a clear plastic bag at the bottom of the bin. Okay, more in part 2.
This pedophile was so terrible that when he was released from prison, they actually put out a public safety warning, warning people to stay away from this guy. This is James Alfred Cooper, who Canadian officials nicknamed the worst pedophile in Canadian history. So back in 1903, James was convicted of the brutal essays and torture of 6 children in Canada. And apparently he had used a number of torture devices to keep these kids from talking. He had used a cat o' nine tails, a cow whip, a cattle prod, belts, and sticks. I mean, 6 victims, they all went through so much, and this guy was responsible for all of it. James's background is shrouded in mystery. Nobody knows too much about what he went through as a kid, but he was convicted of assault when he was 22 years old back in 1958, and years later, his criminal career started out with burglary. So at first, when he would break into houses, he would just steal things for the thrill of it. He would take family photos, he would take fridge magnets, items from the kitchen, but that evolved into him wanting to wake up the people that he was robbing. He would stand over these people's beds, wake them up violently in the middle of the night, and then escape out of a window or through the door that he broke in through. But that evolved into a desire to SA people inside of their own homes. At one point, he SA'd a minor in their own home at knife point after waking them up in the middle of the night. He also did the same thing to a single mother while holding her at knife point. I mean, this guy was terrible and would only get worse. At one point, though, he married a woman named Patricia, who already had 3 kids. He would eventually have another child with her, and this is when the abuse of children began. And this is when the abuse really started. He would use these horrific tools to actually torture and abuse the children that were living under his own roof. And he did these mind games with the kids. He even made them eat things like their own excrement out of their pants while everybody in the house watched. I mean, this guy was sick and twisted. I mean, there's so much to the story that is so graphic and disturbing that I cannot talk about it here on TikTok. If you want to look it up, there's a great article online that explains this whole case, and it's just really hard to get through. But he would even do things like buy tubs of ice cream, rub it on his body, and make his children lick it off of him. He even at one point invited a neighborhood girl over with one of his own children, and he essayed both of them. Keep in mind, this whole time he was also physically abusing the children, beating them, he was verbally abusing them. He was just the worst person. I can't even get that across how bad of a guy this dude was. Eventually, though, in 1987, he finally was arrested and charged with doing all of these horrible things. Eventually, DNA would link him to some of the break-ins that he had committed as well, and the assaults that he had committed during those break-ins. And at the time, he was given a 30-year sentence. Now, that doesn't sound like very much, but in Canada, that was the longest sentence ever given in Canadian history for crimes like this. But unfortunately, with Canada's laws, this meant that he didn't have to serve that much time for what he had done to his own children, to all of these kids for so many years, to all the random people he had victimized during the break-ins. And in 2012, he was allowed to walk free from prison after only serving 21 years. He was paroled out. And that's what led the Toronto Police Department, like I said at the beginning, to release a public safety warning, warning people that this guy was out of prison, he was walking amongst them, and that they didn't know what he was going to do next. So at the end of the day, if his sentences would have been imposed consecutively instead of concurrently, he would have been in prison for 180 years, meaning he would have died in prison. But since they don't do that in Canada, he only ended up serving those 21 years. Now, there is a little silver lining. Shortly after his release, he was re-arrested for breaking the terms of his parole. And at the time, he was on chemical castration drugs. He was actually urging his doctor to give him less of them. But since he was a first-time offender, as they called him back in '93 when he was sentenced, he was released shortly after violating the terms of his parole. And once again, he is somewhere out in Canadian society doing God knows what. I just thought I should make this TikTok to let you guys know that he is out there. And he's dangerous. He is a terrible human being. I'm urging you, if you want to read more about this case, to look up the news article. It is one of the most disgusting things I've ever read. And yeah, this guy is really worst of the worst. I can't think of a worse individual than this guy.